Change it directly to that. Maybe that. There it goes. I have no idea. Didn't promise you I didn't touch a thing.
I believe you. I seriously do.
Hey, I think we're back. Hopefully that means we got sound. Let me check one more thing. Hold on. I think we're good, man. I'm checking other stuff. All right. All right. Do I still have sound when I do that? Sound looks, I'm recording. I'm showing sound. Let me make sure I got sound over here. That should be coming through. I have no idea, everybody. Hey, it's good to see you this morning. I didn't change a thing. It was working when I turned it on. I turned it on at about 10:30. Everything was working. Turned on the camera. The camera was working. Sound was not. I don't know why. Life is fun. Life is fun. That's probably, I guess, I don't know. But anyway, I think we got it fixed. I hope y'all can hear me now. So good to see you this morning. Good to be with you here on From the Deep End. Of course, I am Jonathan Jenkins, who knows so much about all this technical stuff that just bad anyway. But thank y'all for tuning in, being part of the show. We, of course, are in a study of the book of Galatians. We are here on the Rockledge Church of Christ pages, as well as the digital Bible study pages. So make sure you like, share, subscribe, all that stuff if you can. Be thankful if you would. They say that helps when you like a video and that kind of stuff. They say that helps. I've never seen any evidence that it does, but they say it does. So we always say it. So, but anyway, Arlene, Mercy, Jimmy, Ronald, good to see y'all all this morning. Thank you for tuning in. As I said, we are going to continue our look here at the book of Galatians today, because that is our study together. So let me go ahead and get that pulled up. Well, not yet. It would help if I actually had my Bible program set up to go. There you go. All right, let me go ahead and get that pulled up for us. There we are. We are in Galatians chapter 2. For the last several broadcasts, we have been there in verses 4 through 6 and talking at a good length about the language that you'll find there in that text. Today we're going to move on. We're going to cover starting verse 7. Ideally, I would like to get all the way down through that section, all the way down there to verse 10, where then Paul starts dealing with, in verse 11, starts dealing with the time that Peter came to Antioch and visited there. So I think probably we'll get down that far. There's not a lot of heavy doctrinal stuff there in verses 7 to 10. There's a couple things we need to talk about, but nothing of any heavy expositional questions. So that shouldn't take us nearly as long as it did on verses 4 through 6. But just in case you haven't been with us or you need a reminder, I believe these verses right here, verses 4 through 6, while they don't get into the detail that later in chapter 2, and then, well, all through chapters, 3, that's the rest of the book, 3, 4, and 5, where Paul goes into great detail of addressing the specific doctrinal problem that's in the church, that is in the churches of Galatia. My case was that it is laid out here, that the foundation of that, the origin of that, really begins here in verses 4 through 6. And the point I was trying to make more broadly from these verses is simply that what he talks about here, about the false brethren and the comparison contrast between freedom and slavery, is a recurring, I would argue, dominant theme throughout all of the writings of Paul. Now, in the book of Galatians and Romans to a degree, we spent some time looking at that. You have freedom and slavery, okay? Your translation can go differently depending on, this is the ESV. If you're a King James, American Standard, even NIV, you might get some slightly different terminology there. but you'll get synonyms of freedom and slavery. And in other passages, freedom in Paul's writings will be compared to, like Romans 7 and 8, will be compared to corruption, bondage, condemnation. Even here in Galatians, we saw the words at the end of chapter 3. We spent a good deal of time looking at, again, being held captive, being imprisoned, and then the variation of the word slavery to the idea of being enslaved. That language comes up and again and again and again and again throughout his writings. The complementary structure that he gives is also within these writings, okay? Because, and we will talk about this at great length when we get into chapter 4, where he makes the allegory between Hagar and Sarah. You have the children of slavery versus that the children, or the child here, Isaac and Ishmael, we're dealing with. But Hagar and Sarah, you have the free woman giving birth to effectively the free child, and then the slave woman giving birth to children of slavery. Okay, now notice the connection here. The one that is born according to the Spirit is the one who is free. The one who was born according to the flesh is the one that is the slave. Okay, so according to the Spirit, which is to be born back up here earlier in this context, through the promises of God, to be born according to the Spirit, that person or that child is now the child of the free, the son of the free woman. Okay, freedom. Spirit equals freedom. Okay, that's the way that works. The flesh, however, the one that is born according to the flesh equals, well, slavery. Point I'd like to make to you, the point I was really trying to make in those 3 or 4 classes that we went through, that is structurally very, very important to the study of Galatians. And it is also very structurally important to the entirety of the writings of Paul. It is the idea of freedom versus slavery, freedom versus bondage is the same as flesh versus spirit. That's the conflict. All right. Now, just to wrap up a review of where we've been, the thought you have to connect to that is the one we took, we illustrated, or we emphasized, better word, out of Colossians 2. In Colossians 2, we have that same idea of submitting to regulations and being taken, there's the word I was looking for, verse number 8, being taken captive. So submitting to regulations, you're being taken captive. The basis of that is philosophy, empty deceit, human tradition, and Paul refers to that as that which is based upon the elemental spirits or the elemental principles, Galatians translation of it, of the world. Okay? And that is the elemental spirit, the elemental principles of the world down there in verse number 20. This is the product of submitting to regulations. Okay? To go by the elemental principle of the world is to go by the flesh. It is to end up in a life of corruption, bondage, condemnation, or slavery. To live according to the Spirit is to live a life of freedom, and that would be the fallout from that. That would be the conclusion from it. There is no condemnation, there is no bondage, and so on. The thing you have to get from that is that nearly every discussion I ever hear about this topic, okay? Sorry, I'm in the wrong, there's what I want. Sorry, I was on the wrong tab. The thing that you need to get out of this is that when people talk about living by the flesh, talk about living a life that is subject to slavery, bondage, corruption, they almost always connect it to depravity. Living by the flesh, in nearly every modern discussion of this, somebody will say that is a life of depravity. It is not. Okay, Paul is not writing to a group of people who are trying to live more depraved lives. He's not doing that in Romans, nor is he doing that in Galatians. The people in Galatians and Romans are both trying to become more and more holy. They're not trying to become less holy. They're trying to find a way to become more holy. And the way that they're trying to do that is chapter 3, verse 3 of Galatians, is they are trying to become perfect by the flesh. Okay? Not by depravity. They're trying to become perfect by the flesh, which is to do that based upon the elemental principle of the world, which means you submit to more and more and more and more regulations. That's the construct. All right. I review all that, and I'm about done with it for today. I review all of that because I can't have you forgetting that as we study through Galatians. I'm telling you, if in your own thinking, I'm talking here in a generalized sense, because I've obviously the entire audience, I don't know everybody's mind individually, but I've had this discussion with enough people of faith over the years that I can tell you, baked into your thinking is the concept that flesh is depravity. In some way it is. You're probably, at least in the audience that this class draws, it's not Calvinistic in its theology largely, although we have a few visitors every now and again that are. Okay? I can just about assure you, even though you are not a Calvinist, I can almost guarantee you have some thought of depravity when you think of flesh. Certainly weakness, certainly something. Because the spirit is willing, the flesh is weak, and we take that, and we take that statement that the flesh is weak, and we start thinking in terms of it's weak, in terms of its depravity. There is a sinful predisposition. There's something. I can just about guarantee you that's where you're going with it. All right, and that will work its way in to your exposition, your discussion, your application of Galatians and Romans. I need you to hear me. I need you to hear me from the last 5 classes, and I need you to hear this summary of that now. I just made up 5. I don't remember how many classes it was. It might have been 5. But those last several classes on verses 4 through 6, I need you to hear me right now. In Paul's writings, the couplet of flesh and spirit in Paul's writings has nothing, zero, zip, zilch, zero, to do with any form of depravity. That is not what the text is discussing. Now, the outcome of living by the flesh is that you end up walking down a path of depravity because it is a hopeless lifestyle. Okay, the reason it is a hopeless lifestyle is not because you are inherently depraved and inherently sinful. The reason that it is a hopeless lifestyle is because when you submit to regulations, things like, man, you better not handle that, you better not taste that, you better not touch that. We talked about that at length on Tuesday. When you go down that path, you need to understand, man, it will encourage you to a self-made religion. It will encourage some form of asceticism. You will be severe to the body when you fail, or perhaps to stop you from failing. You will be severe to the body, but you need to understand they are of no value in stopping the indulgences of the flesh. Okay, it doesn't work. Submitting to regulations doesn't work. What is the outcome of submitting to all of those regulations? The outcome is you end up knowing that God's law is good, but you're just a fleshly person. And what you are is sold under sin, and that there's nothing good in you. You know why you think there's nothing good in you? Not because God ever said it. The reason you think there's no good in you whatsoever is because guess what you have done over and over and over again in your life? You have a desire to do what's right, but not the ability to carry it out. Why do you not have the ability to carry out to do what is right? Because you have constructed it in your brain that what is right that you ought to be doing is submitting to all the regulations of do not taste, do not touch, and do not handle. That's why you think there's no good in you. That's why you think you even though you want to do what's right, is because you have defined right by all of the regulations you're submitting to, and they're not God's. They're yours. Or your culture, your peers, your circumstance, whatever it is. You could be a Jew living among the Pharisees who, as we saw, are encompassing land and sea to make a single proselyte. And you make them, when you become a proselyte of the Pharisee, you become twice the child of the devil that they are. The end result of this fleshly life is a life of, well, it becomes a life of depravity because it is a life of hopelessness. It is a life that will teach you that you are nothing but a wretched man who is being held captive to the law of sin in your life. And you need a deliverance from this body of death. That's what you'll end up thinking about yourself. Now, this is not a study of Romans 7 and 8. If we were doing that, we'd have we'd finish out that discussion, because you want the answer to this, okay? We're going to be there in chapter 8. All right, I'm not going to go down there today. We'll probably get back over there as we get into Galatians 3 and 4. But that's where we have been, okay? What I want you to understand completely in the discussions that we have been having about these verses is that there are false brothers. They are part of, as we'll see when we get down here, probably on Tuesday next week, they are part of the circumcision party. Okay, that starts in Acts 11. They're there in Acts 15. All right, so whether you think Galatians 2 is about the Acts 11 visit of Paul to Jerusalem, or the Acts 15 visit of Paul to Jerusalem, doesn't really matter, because the circumcision is there. Circumcision party is there in Acts 11. Circumcision party is there in Acts 15. Doesn't really matter. But their basis, the circumcision party basis, is Pharisees, Acts 15:5. They are false brethren. They are not teaching the truth, okay? They've snuck in secretly. And false brothers who are trying to make you think that you need to become perfect by submitting to all of the regulations according to your flesh. These false brothers are effectively trying to add regulation upon regulation upon regulation to bring you back into a strict obedience, which the end result of that is slavery. All right, now we'll have some more to say about that at the end of chapter 4 on into chapter 5. Okay, that's where we've been. Now, Paul says about this that we did not yield to them even for a moment. Well, we talked about that several classes ago. But that, of course, we start this discussion with bringing up of Titus there in chapter 2 and verse number 1. Titus is being a Gentile. He was not forced to be circumcised. That's what verse 3 says, even though he's a Greek, ESV. We compared that, of course, if you can think back several hours to when we were doing that. We talked about Timothy and the comparison contrast between Titus and Timothy. Paul makes sure Timothy is circumcised because he is, at least in terms of his heritage, half Jew. Okay, all right. But Titus, he's a Greek. Not going to circumcise him because that's what the false brothers are wanting. The circumcision party wants to circumcise Titus. Okay, and the end result of that is it will bring you into slavery. All right, now we'll talk more about why that doesn't necessarily bring Timothy into slavery. Chapter 4 is probably where we'll get back over there. Okay, so Paul says, not even for a minute did we submit to that, because we want to make sure the truth of the gospel might be preserved for you. Okay, he's writing to an audience that eventually he's going to talk about as being, he's going to acknowledge the Gentile basis of that. That's chapter 4, verse 6. He's going to talk to the Gentile, and same things here. Now, actually, whether Jew or Gentile, this is going to be true, because even circumcision at this point no longer technically applies to a Jew. So if you change that doctrine, Paul is stating that the truth of the gospel is no longer going to be preserved because, as he said all the way back up here in chapter 1, you are turning to a different gospel, not that there is another one. All right. So that the doctrine that these false brethren are bringing in is a false doctrine. And Paul says we're not going to give them space even for a moment. Not even for a moment are we going to allow them in. So anyway, he then adds, just to wrap up verse 6 to make the transition, those I say who seemed influential added nothing to me. Again, a defense of Paul's apostleship. That sort of continues here in chapter 2 in just a moment. But that certainly goes back to where Paul began this portion of the discussion all the way back up in chapter 1, verse 11, where the gospel, he says, I certify to you, brethren, that the gospel that I received, it was not preached to me. It's not man's gospel. I did not receive it from man, nor was I taught it, but I received it by the revelation of Jesus Christ. That's where this gospel that I'm preaching to you now came from. Okay. And so he makes the point here, the false brethren didn't submit to them, and even those who seemed to be influential didn't add anything to me. Now, specifically, he's going to mention those who seemed to be influential. Their names are here in verse number 9, James and Cephas and John. Here they seem to be pillars. Same thing, okay? They seem to be influential. They seem here to be pillars. Now, could this group have included others beyond James and Cephas and John? Certainly. The church at Jerusalem had elders. If this is Acts 15, the elders were especially mentioned there in Acts 15. Were there still other apostles in the city of Jerusalem? Well, if it's the Acts 11 visit, absolutely, they were still there. If it's the Acts 15 visit, it seems as if the apostles, a collection of them, are gathered because they are mentioned there. So the rest of the apostles, either in whole or in part, would have been there in Acts 11 or Acts 15. So he mentions these three in particular, Cephas and John and James. We'll talk about that more. Actually, we'll talk about that especially as we get into verse 11 and following, because the problem that arises in verse 11 with Peter not acting properly in the city of Antioch among the Gentiles is attributed to James. So we'll talk about that more fully when we get down there, again, probably on Tuesday. So let's go ahead and start looking at the language here in this verse. Elaine, good to see you this morning. Just want to, PD, good to see you. Thank you for the dropping in and for leaving a comment. By the way, as always, if you have any questions, any comments, feel free to go ahead and put those in. I do try to look at the screen every now and again. You are always welcome to ask a Bible question, make a comment. Prefer it to have something to do with Galatians, because that is helpful. But if it's a legitimate Bible question, we will do our best to try and give you an answer to it, no matter what it is. So you got something on your mind? I can always, it doesn't take me much to go off topic. I can always go off topic and try to answer your question for you if I can. So feel free to do that as you as something comes on your mind. But thank you all for tuning in, being a part of the show today. Let's go ahead and start in verse 7 rather. Paul says, on the contrary, that is obviously in the contrary to those that the false brethren that were present, that he did not come into submission, but even more specifically, those who seemed to be influential, who'd added nothing to him, he says exactly the opposite happened. When they saw that I had been entrusted with the gospel to the uncircumcised. All right. Excuse me. Let's start right there. When they saw that I had been entrusted with the gospel to the uncircumcised. All right. I think it should be interesting that they saw that. That language is, I mean, I suppose it could just be metaphorical, inclusive. But it could also be very much be that they saw something, because Paul's going to effectively make that same argument in chapter 3, in verse number 5, to the Galatians, because that's the question: is the gospel that Paul taught there legitimately the gospel? That's why we start in chapter 1, verse 11, which is, I certify to you, brethren, the gospel that I'm preaching is not man's gospel. I didn't receive it from man, so no one laid their hands on me to give it to me, nor was I taught it by man. I'm not somebody's disciple. I'm not somebody's student, but I received it by the revelation of Jesus Christ. So it came directly from heaven. Okay, that's the power from on high. Acts chapter 1, verse 8, baptism of the Holy Spirit, empowering Paul. That's how it came. Okay, that's his argument. He concludes it, but he comes back to it in chapter 3, verse 5, and then he asking the question about the Galatians have been bewitched by those who have brought this false gospel into their midst, and he concludes that portion of the argument by saying, does he who supplies the Spirit to you and work miracles among you do so by the works of the law or with the hearing of faith? So pick the gospel you're after. The gospel you're teaching is one that's based on the works you're receiving, rather, is one that's based upon the works of the law. The one that I brought you is one that is based upon the hearing of faith. So where's the evidence? Where's the evidentiary basis for it? Well, it's the one who supplies the Spirit to you. That would be through the laying on of hands, and who works miracles among you. So therefore, something that is visible, something that can be seen. All right, same language is found back in Acts chapter 8, when Peter and John end up in the villages of Samaria. After Philip has been there, the apostles at Jerusalem, they send Peter and John down to them. They pray on them. They lay their hands on them that they might receive the Holy Spirit. Then verse 17, they lay their hands on them and they receive the Holy Spirit. Look at verse 18. Now, when Simon saw that the Spirit was given through the laying on of the apostles' hands, he offered them money. When Simon saw that, there was a visible manifestation of it. And what it is those people began to speak in tongues or whatever other thing would have been going on there. It was a visible manifestation that Peter and John had the ability to pass the Holy Spirit on to somebody else, which is the same basic point that Paul is making here in Galatians 3. Okay, you see when somebody gets the Spirit. You see when miracles are worked among you. It's visible. It's evidentiary. Stay in that thought and go to 2 Corinthians. Can't see what I just typed. Hold on. 2 Corinthians 12. In a context that we have been in our study of Galatians together already, Paul is dealing with these false apostles that have come in. Where's the language I want? Is anyone there? There it is. I wasn't far enough from the text. I couldn't find it. They've disguised themselves as apostles of Christ. They are false apostles, deceitful workmen. Maybe kind of like those false brethren that snuck in Galatians 2. But after answering and proving, making the argument again that he is more of a Hebrew and more qualified than they are, you get into chapter 12, and Paul makes this statement. He says, I am not at all inferior to these super apostles. Okay, that's fully tongue in cheek. They are not actually super apostles. They're false apostles. He's making fun of them here. All right. And he says, if you're following after these dudes, I'm better than they are. I'm not in any way inferior to them. And then he's going to make the point. He says, the signs of a true apostle were performed among you with utmost patience, with signs, wonders, and mighty works. So again, visible and evidentiary. Objective. You didn't just have to get a feeling for it. It was objective. All right. That's the basis. So, in Galatians chapter 2, I don't know that it necessarily demands this, but it says, on the contrary, when they saw that I had been entrusted with the gospel to the uncircumcised. I wonder what might have happened for them to have seen that. Now, it does say, verse 9, that they perceived the grace that was given to me. Let me come back to that. I'll tell you what, let me just come back to that when we get down to verse number 9. But that would open up another portion of the argument that will take us to 1 Corinthians, not 2 Corinthians, 1 Corinthians chapter 12 in just a minute. But at least up here, it is certainly possible that part of how those who are influential in the church at Jerusalem saw that the gospel to the uncircumcised was given to Paul is that, Paul and, well, Barnabas is there too, but Paul and Barnabas were there. There would have been testimony from both Paul and Barnabas, but maybe perhaps, I don't know, the signs of a true apostle. He worked miracles among them and maybe helped supply the gospel, the Holy Spirit to some saints in Jerusalem. Maybe actually Paul, when he got there, he began to do some of the work of an apostle, so that the other apostles would say, yep, he's got to be one of us, because they would know the signs of a true apostle. They would know that immediately. Now, I can't prove that, but I just think it's very interesting that Paul uses the word saw right there. Now, he does, again, as I said, we'll get down there in verse 9. He does use the word perceive, but that those could mean the same thing. They perceived it because they saw it, or they saw it in the way that they perceived it. They saw it in the sense that in our mind's eye, we come to a conclusion. We draw the proper conclusion. That word could be used in that way as well. So I just want to bring it up. I don't know that is necessary here, but if it is, if the word saw is literal, they actually saw this. Those verses we just went over will provide you the basis for how you would actually see that being the case. Okay. So take that for what it's worth. We'll get down there in just a second. Got a few comments coming in after I said that. Let's see what we got. Elaine says, Paul says he buffets his body daily that he might not be a castaway. 1 Corinthians 9. Yep. So explain this to me with reference to this. I'm trying to fit all this together. Okay. In reference to which part of it? In reference to this portion, is that taking us back to that previous discussion over here in Colossians 2, where we talked about being severe to the body? That would be my guess, because that's the last time we kind of talked about that, and that would go around with, in my brain, that's the end of 1 Corinthians 9. Is that right? I think that's at the end of 1 Corinthians 9, if I remember correctly. Yeah, there it is. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but an imperishable. So I do not run aimlessly. I do not box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after the preaching to others, I should be disqualified. So I'm guessing that would be the part you were talking about. Maybe this question goes back a little bit, and that's a great question, because it sounds like the language says very, very much the same thing. Okay, because this self-made religion leads to asceticism and severity to the body. Okay, and the word severity there, it's too small. Y'all probably can't see it, but let me just go ahead and bring that up. NASB dictionary is fine. Okay. There's an English translation of it, unsparing treatment, or the NASB translates that severe treatment. So there's the Greek word that's there. That's where it comes from. Okay. And Paul talks about here, he says that I discipline my body. Okay. Slightly different word here, but it just means to strike under the eye. Okay. That's the idea of it. So a little bit different word, but same idea, at least conceptually. All right. What we have here then is this could go down a long conversation, Elaine. Let me answer it this way. If you're going to live a holy, godly, righteous life, does that require of you to do and not do certain things? Absolutely. From the very second page of your Bible. Okay, let's go back there. We did talk about this in the class on Tuesday. But go back to the very beginning of your Bible. Adam and Eve are there. God creates the garden. He puts man in it. And he puts him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to keep it. It says you can eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. So you have, from the very start, things that you ought to do, You need to work the garden and you need to keep it. So it needed to be maintained on some level. Adam had a job. That's on the positive side. Here are things you need to go do. Okay? Now, it would have been just as much a violation of God's law if Adam had not worked the garden and not kept it up. He had a job. All right? That's just like a parent talking to a child. I've put you in this lovely room. You got to clean your room. Okay? There's a job you got to do. You got to clean the room. That's effectively it. But on the other hand, there's a portion of this you don't touch. Okay? You clean your room, you stay out of the other room. That's the law. Some things you do, some things you don't do. Is that true after that? Yeah. Noah, build an ark. Something you do. On the other side of that, some things you don't do. Don't follow the rest of you folks. Keep on going down the line. Every step along the way, on every page of your Bible, there are things you're supposed to do and not do. That's not the question. Now, well, if you're a Calvinist who believes in some form of faith only, it becomes way off topic there. But they think that that's not true, okay? They have to admit on some level that it is true, and we have to listen to them try and explain that. But it is true on every page of your Bible. There is not a single moment in human history that, well, I guess from the time Adam is made until God has this conversation with him. From every moment of that point, from Genesis 2:15 until Jesus comes back, every moment of human history, God has things that people are supposed to do, and at least one thing that people are not supposed to do. That's always true. Guess what you ought to do? You ought to obey that. You ought to do what God says to do. That's what you ought to do. Okay? So, should you then, to go back to our text, should you then discipline your body? Should you keep it under control? Yeah, you should. You should keep it under control. You should. Okay? Is there a path to doing that? Yeah, there is. People say there isn't, but there absolutely is. Galatians chapter 5 and verse number 24 says that those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. So yeah, there's a path to doing it. You can crucify the flesh with its passions and desires. To use this language over here, you can your body and keep it under control. It's doable. Okay? That gets us back to the discussion. What's the proper way? Well, the proper way, the improper way, is to submit to regulations, to follow the elemental principle of the world, which is if you need to behave, you just need to find as many, you need to, every time something pops up, because that's what we do. And the reason this is, by the way, the reason this is an elemental principle of the world is, I tell you what, do you happen to live in a subdivision that has an HOA? Here's what happens. Somebody moves into the neighborhood because the HOA already has all of its bylaws. It's got everything on all the deed restrictions are already there. Somebody new moves into the neighborhood, and lo and behold, they do something that the people who wrote the bylaws for the HOA hadn't thought about yet. What do? Because we don't like the color of the bush, I don't know, that somebody put in their yard. Now we have to have an HOA meeting and we add in a rule because we just hadn't thought that somebody might do it that way. Okay. That's the reason state and government legislatures come together to make it bigger than an HOA. The same exact thing happens at your HOA. Or if you're a student, let's make it even smaller. You're a student and you're at school, or you're a parent with a child. And that student comes up with a new way. What do? You create a new law. You create a new rule, because that's the way we stop people from doing things we don't want them to do. New rules. Home, school, work, HOA, city government, state government, The federal government, that's what we do. That's why law books keep getting thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker. Because somewhere along the line, somebody thought if we just create enough laws, people will stop doing the stuff we don't want them to do. That's why it is the elemental principle of the world. That's how we handle it. Guess what? Submitting to regulations that go down to do not handle, do not taste, to do not touch. Okay? They are of no value in stopping the indulgence of the flesh. They don't work. They just don't. Okay? However, well, let me stay in Colossians 2. However, there is a way to make it work. Instead of stopping the indulgence of the flesh by regulation, why don't you do it by a recognition of who you are? ESV translates this, if then you have been raised with Christ. Okay? It's not the King James, is it? No, King James is if. Maybe is it not the NIV? Ooh, wow, that's wow, that is awfully small. Oh, that's the Reader's version. Well, that's good enough. The NIV Reader's version, let me make that bigger. Okay? Translates that you have been raised up with Christ. Okay, takes the subjunctive and makes it assertive. All right, that's the idea. Paul is not leaving doubt here. If then you could just simply translate, the word I was looking for there is since. There is a translation somewhere that translates 3:1 as since you have been raised with Christ. Okay, I don't remember what it is though off the top of my head here. But if you then, since you have been raised with Christ, all right, he's making an argument based upon this is your identity. This is who you are. Since that's who you are, seek those things which are above. Set your mind on things that are above. Don't regulate the body by don't be severe to your body through asceticism and self-righteousness and submitting to regulations, which is what the world will teach you to do. Don't do it that way. Recognize who you are and go seek those things that are above. And when you do that, guess what you're going to do? You're going to put to death what is earthly in you. Or in other words, as Galatians says, if you recognize who you are, you recognize that you have been raised with Christ. Your mind is set on the things of Christ, on things that are above. You're not focused on the things that are here on the earth. By the way, not sensuality. No. This is not about sensuality. This is not about hedonism. This is about submitting to regulation to stop the indulgences of the flesh. You don't do that by having your mind set on things that are on the earth. Like what? Oh, I don't know. How about referring to things that all perish as they are used? What perishes as it is used? How about things that are on the earth? Don't set your mind on the things that are on the earth that are perishing, and that you're worried about. I might look at that, I might touch that, I might taste that, I may get so wrapped up in that. And so the way I'm going to stop it is I'm going to create a whole bunch of regulations. I don't like the pickup truck my neighbor's parking in his driveway, new regulation. I don't like the color he painted the house, new regulation. I don't like the tiles they picked or the shingles they picked for their roof, new regulation. New regulation, new regulation, new regulation, new regulation. Don't think like that. About things that are on the earth. The point is not hedonism. To have your mind set on things that are on the earth is not a life that wants to be hedonistic. That is not the context of Paul's discussions. It is a life that is trying to be holy. It's trying to be made perfect. How do you fix it? Not by regulation. You submit it by recognizing who you are. You're risen with Christ. And since you are risen with Christ, your mind is set on the things of Christ. For you have died. Romans 6, how can we that are dead to sin continue any longer therein? You have died and your life is hidden with Christ in God. You are an heir. You're a son. You belong to God. You're a friend of God. When Christ who appears, you will appear with him in glory. That's a promise, by the way. Look what you can do then. With your mind set on things that are above. King James, I believe, says you can mortify. ESV, put to death, therefore, the earthly things in you. Well, wait a minute. That's the whole discussion. How am I going to put to death those things if I don't submit to regulations? You want to see it? Okay, this is a great verse you referenced here, Elaine. This is a great verse because it does it. Paul is very careful here. I don't want to, let me go ahead and bump that up a notch size-wise. I don't want to run aimlessly. He's given his life. He's an apostle of Jesus Christ. He has given his life to that. Man, he doesn't want to fail at that. I don't want to be someone who's beating. I don't want to box as one beating the air. If I'm going to walk into a ring and fight, I want to actually have a fight. Okay? So what I do is I discipline my body and keep it under control. Isn't that the whole point? How do we do that? How do we discipline the whole body and keep it under control? Because we just saw if I submit to regulations, it's of no value in stopping my body from indulging itself. How do I stop it? The reason this is such a great verse is because of the context that Paul uses. Do you not know? Verse 24. 1 Corinthians 9:24 is where we are. Do you not know? Well, of course you do. This is rhetorical. You know this. That in a race, all the runners run, but only one receives the prize. So run that you may obtain it. How? Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable crown, but we an imperishable. So I do not run aimlessly. In a race, only one receives the prize. Now, you can make the argument that, some people are from the deep end of the gene pool and they can just run better than anybody. That's true. But think about an Olympic athlete. Okay. I remember stories that people used to tell about Jerry Rice. For football fans know who Jerry Rice is. If you're not a football fan, you may know the name because he's been around. Jerry Rice is a Hall of Fame wide receiver, played most of his career for the San Francisco 49ers. Even back when he was playing, he started in the 80s, into the 90s, Rice was renowned for the way that man trained in the offseason. The hills that he would run and so on. There used to be videos of him just doing all kind of great. And he just, one of the reasons, he was from the deep end of the gene pool. That helped. But the dude ran every single day. Even in the off season, he would train and train and train and train and train. And there are just people like that. Why? You see, if you are somebody who it's December 30th and I'm thinking about a New Year's resolution, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start a new exercise program. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go out and I'm going to run/walk, whatever it is, a mile every day. Bang. I just created a mile every day thing. How long does that last? How long does that last? About a minute and a half. Is it Apple. I think Apple for a new one of their watches that they're selling. Apple has just had a video, a commercial out, or an ad. I don't watch much broadcast television anymore, but an online ad, I've been seeing it, where they, I guess they were talking about, they ran it in January up to February, and just talking about how quickly people end their New Year's resolutions, and theirs is about running. Okay, because their watch apparently will keep a track of your health and your score. Because now you have an external regulation. Your watch is going to fix it for you. Okay. Mine won't. That's not a smartwatch. It doesn't do nothing but tell time. But your watch will help you do it. New rule, new regulation. External person making sure I'm doing the right thing. Why doesn't it work? Why do you almost always fail on your New Year's resolutions? If it's this, I need to get in shape. I need to lose weight. It's just better for me. I'm going to go run. You know why you fail? It is because you know you ought to be doing it. It's good for you. You know it would be better for you if you did it. And so every now and again, an impulse will strike you, and guess what you'll do? You'll go out and you'll do it. And then after about 6 minutes, as you realize, as Paul told Timothy, that bodily exercise profits a little. It's helpful, but man, I don't feel like it today. I'll just skip today. I'm not going to go to the gym today. I'm not going to run today. Or maybe because I went running today, man, I'll eat me an extra piece of pie. And it ends up not giving you the result that you want. So guess what you end up doing? You quit. And you know what you say about yourself after that? After you give up and after you quit, when you created this whole plan, regulations, by the way, you created this whole plan of regulations, and then all of a sudden you just quit. You know what you say about yourself after that? I am just an out of shape fatty. That's what I am. And I am just sold under sin. And that's when we start talking about, oh man, either my mama or my daddy, they look just like that when they got to my age. Everybody in my family just looks like that. That skinny person over there, that person that's fit over there, that person's just, that's just not fair. I'm just sold under this. And here's what I know. I just can't do it. It's just not in me. I just can't do it. Until, be it the doctor or whatever else, somebody says it to us again, and then we realize I have the desire. I know I ought to do it, but man, I just can't seem to get it right. I just don't have the ability to it because this is just the way I'm wired. I'm just genetically this way. I can't fix it. And I am sold under that. I am just of the flesh. See, that's exactly what we do. Now, when we do it that way, we don't get mystical about it and don't think the Holy Spirit's got to zap us or something. No. We just deal with that, like we deal with human nature, almost like it is an elementary foundational principle of the world. Now, that fails for us. Why does it not fail for a Jerry Rice? Why can that guy get up? I don't know I don't remember the stories. I remember they were impressive, but I don't remember all the stories. But why can he get up at dark 30? At 36 years of age, just made that number up. I think he played until his 40s? I think he played into his 40s. Hall of Fame wide receiver, still in his late 30s, still going out before the crack of dawn and training himself harder than anybody else did. Why? Every athlete exercises self-control. Remember, this is written in the 1st century. Unlike today, you didn't have a gym every 600 yards on the side of the road, and you didn't have all the fitness equipment that you bought but you never used. You didn't. No. Athletes. I mean, the Greeks were responsible. Oh, I don't know, for a certain Olympic type thing that we still do. That's your background. If you were qualified enough to stop, oh, I don't stop being a slave or stop being this or that or the other, and you got identified as an athlete, guess what you knew about yourself? Is you were an athlete. See, this is about identity. You have something in your life right now. I was talking about being fit and weight loss and all of that. I guarantee it. You have something in your life right now that you don't need a single regulation to make sure that you do it. My mother-in-law was named Claudia. She passed away several years ago. She was a nurse. By trade, she was a nurse. But there was something she needed absolutely no discipline to do. None. None whatsoever. Cook. Have mercy. Claudia, she could cook. She could cook. And she loved it. Needed no discipline. She could cook because she loved it. Didn't need a reminder. She did need a reminder of what she actually had in the pantry, because she'd end up with like 5 boxes or cans of what she'd keep. Anyway, another story. But she didn't need any reminder of it. And I guarantee you have something like that. Reading a book. My daughter is a book reader. My daughter reads more books in a month than I read in a decade. Okay. She doesn't need somebody to tell her to read. Maybe you paint. Maybe you sew. Maybe you are that person who likes to get up and walk and go to the gym. What makes it that for you? Because you love it. Why do you love it? Because it is who you are. You see, Jerry Rice got up and went to the field every day and went to the hill and started running every day because that's who he is. And to use another verse here out of Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, though, this time, our outward self is wasting away. Our inner self is being renewed day by day. Even for a man like Jerry Rice, there comes a point when you're 23 and you make it to the NFL and you're running up and down your hill. At 23, you're running up and down that hill. Like I said, I think he played into his 40s. I know this. I don't care how hard you work. Running up and down the hill at 23, guarantee you he was faster at 23 than he was at 40. Because guess what? The outer man wastes away day by day. Day by day by day, the outer man wastes away. But what keeps him getting on that hill every single day? Because the inner man is renewed. He's doing the thing he loves. You don't need discipline or you don't need external regulation to do the thing you love. How do you get that? You have to change the inner man. Change the inner man, not the outer man. Change the inner man. How do you then, well, when you change the inner man, let me say this. You protect the outer man. How is it that an athlete exercises self-control in all things? How is it that a Jerry Rice doesn't eat too many pieces of pie? How is it that he doesn't, eat too many pieces of pie? How does he do that? Cost him too much. as lovely as that pie might be, or whatever else he might do to his body, as fun as that might be, it would cost me the thing I truly love. And he loved playing football. He loved being the best. And he was. The inner man controlled the outer man. But the inner man here is identified as an athlete. The athlete does this because that is who an athlete is. You are not an athlete. Well, I don't know you personally, but get the point? You're not. What you are is somebody who knows, well, I ought to do better. But that's not who you are. You ever come across somebody who has tried to lose weight or tried to get fit for the last 10, 15, 20 years, and they read all the books, they do all the programs, they got all their stuff, they do, and how many times do they fail? Every single time they fail. Until that person that wanted to quit drinking or quit smoking or quit eating or whatever it is, until the inner man changed. Until the inner man changed. And guess what the inner man has the ability to do? To exercise self-control and discipline the body. It's not severe to the body. It's not asceticism. It is self-control and discipline. Why? Because you have the ability, believe it or not, all you false teachers out there, you have the ability. What book am I in? I need Galatians. I'm in Colossians. That's why this is not making sense. You need the ability, or you have the ability, rather, to crucify the flesh with its desires and passions. How do you do it? How does an athlete always exercise self-control? Because he's an athlete. Nobody forced him to be an athlete. He recognized who he is. He found his passion. He found what his heart desired. He found what his heart was fixed on, set on. Okay? Jerry Rice was not going to go work a corporate job. That was not an option. There's one job I have. I'm going to be a receiver in the NFL. That's what I'm going to be. And when that is who I am, I will go do all of the things that are necessary for me to be who I am. I don't need external regulation. I don't need you to tell me that I have to be there at 5:30 in the morning. Because it's who I am. And because of who I am, anything that violates who I am is gone. Guess what? Guess what? The Holy Spirit did nothing to make Jerry Rice an NFL receiver. I don't even know if he's a Christian. I don't know what his faith is. Okay? That is self-control. That's what Paul calls it. Athletes exercise self-control in all things. Why? Because they are athletes. Because that's what an athlete does. My mother-in-law, who was a cook, cooked perfectly in all things. Why? Because that's what she was. She was a cook. My daughter reads more books than I'll ever read. My daughter turned 35 this year. Wow. 35. She's read more books in her life than I'll ever read. Why? Because that's who she is. It's not discipline, it's passion. It's the inner man controlling the outer man. Her eyes look at books because her heart wants books. That's the way this works. Not regulations, not flesh, but heart, spirit. That's what does it. To wrap this up, see it again. The elemental spirit of the world, the elemental principle of the world is regulations. That is based upon philosophy, empty deceit, and human tradition, because that's the way we do it. By the way, do regulations change the way that people work? Yeah, regulations do work. Now, I talked about earlier HOAs and governments and so on changing regulations to make things work, and I said, well, they don't work. They don't work internally. You know how they do work? I talked about Jerry Rice a lot. I've been saying he gets up at dark 30, 5:30 in the morning to go. I don't remember the stories, as I said. Somebody, I'm sure you can find it online. Gets up, let's say it was 5:30 every morning, gets up and goes out and goes to work. Nobody has to tell him to do that. Nobody has to train him to do that. Nothing, because that's who he is. He has a goal. That goal is consistent with his heart, with his feeling, with his soul, with his mind, with his spirit. And so his passion drives him to do it every day. Is that how you get everybody up at 5:30 in the morning? No, it's not. There is an institution out there that gets people up at dark 30 every morning. Do you know what it's called? It's called the Marines. It's just the military. I picked Marines. It's called the Marines. Okay, my good friend Eric. Y'all know him. You did the Bible study. People know him. He hadn't been on with us yet again, but still a good friend with Eric. He was a Marine. I say was a Marine. That's not even what I'm supposed to say. You Marines can tell me that. Went to boot camp. Guess what you do when you go to boot camp? Dark 30. You're up. If you're not up and dressed for the day, in uniform, ready to go, when the drill sergeant walks into your barracks, is that a good thing or a bad thing for you? Oh, it's a bad thing. That's a real bad thing. Guess what will happen to you? On a good day, you might be doing push-ups. They punish you until you start behaving right. Now, you do that long enough, they actually begin to change your habits. Okay, now that's a different topic for another day. Okay, way outside our ledger here. Okay. Is there another form in human history that creates that? Because if you're a Marine and you're in boot camp and you're not getting up at dark 30 and you're not in uniform ready to do whatever drill you're doing that day, and your bed's not made and all the stuff that, you military people can walk me through all that because I've never been in the military. That goes really bad for you at that point. Who knows what you might be doing? I said push-ups, you might be, your drill just got worse. The pack you're carrying might have just gotten heavy. The distance you're about to run just got longer. They will do everything they can to discourage you, or how me say it this way, to encourage you to obey, to get up at dark 30 and make sure you're ready, because they need you to be a soldier. They're taking something small and trying to make it something big so that when it's time for you to go fight, that you'll run when you're supposed to run. They need you disciplined. And even though it's not in you, because they have complete control over your life, what you eat, where you live, what your day is, because they control every element of your life, they can regulate everything that you think, say, and do. Is there another institution in human history that has had that power? See, employment doesn't work, because if that's your employer, guess what you can ultimately do? I quit. Now, there might be consequences. You may be able to pay your bills and so on, but you can still say, I quit. There's the military, and then there's one, and you can't run away from the military, by the way. You can try, but they'll find you, and that's going to go real bad for you. They have prisons. Once you're in, you're in. Is there another form of human institutions that does the same thing? Yeah, there is. We call it slavery. Does a slave get up at dark 30? Yeah. If that's what the master wants, the slave gets up at dark 30. Does the slave, I don't know, submit to regulations where if he's told, don't you handle that, don't you eat that, don't you even touch that over there, does that slave have to do that? Yeah, absolutely. Can that slave run away if he wants to? No, he can't. He's captive. Does the master actually care about the heart, soul, and mind of the slave? Not really. I mean, he might care if that heart, soul, and mind still had an impulse in him that would cause him to handle the things he's not supposed to handle and somehow disobey. But what he actually cares about is making sure that person always obeys. That's the process of a slave. Now, hopefully, a slave ultimately becomes for the master a proper slave. Hopefully, the enrollee, the recruit, that's the word I'm looking for, in the Marines actually becomes a good soldier, actually becomes a Marine. But what they have to have is absolute obedience, which strangely is exactly what these false brothers back here in verse 4 were trying to get people into slavery. These false brothers wanted people in slavery. Even more strange, that is exactly what Paul describes here in Romans 6. Got way too many highlights over there. I need to delete some of those. It's just from multiple classes I've taught, and I've left the highlights on. That's way too many. But notice what it says. You were once slaves of sin. You have been set free from sin. And you really want to twist your mind? We're not going to go down this path because I've already been too long in answering this great question. You really want to mess up your brain a little bit? You have become a slave of righteousness. Well, wait a minute. Isn't that exactly the thing that Paul is criticizing the false brothers for? Isn't he exactly criticizing the false brothers because the false brothers are trying to bring people back into slavery? But that's exactly what he says happened over here in Romans 6. You have become a slave of righteousness. And isn't it in Galatians? Because he just said, you've been set free, frankly, to become a slave again. But here he says, back in Galatians 4, or Galatians 2, rather, verse 4, false brothers are bringing us into slavery, and in order to do that, they are spying out our freedom. And then he goes on to tell them back down here at the end of chapter 4, we are not children, chapter 4, rather, excuse me. We are not the children of the slave woman, but we are children of the free woman. So therefore, for freedom, Christ has set us free. Stand firm in the freedom. And don't submit again to a yoke of slavery. But he just says back over here in Romans 6, that you've become a slave of righteousness. How many times have you heard a sermon out of Romans 6? I'll guarantee you have. I will guarantee you may have been at one of the soundest churches of Christ you'll ever find with a wonderful, good, godly man in the pulpit, and he preached out of Romans chapter 6, and I'll guarantee you, he called you a slave to righteousness. And to justify that, he went to passages like, well, the opening verse of just about any epistle of Paul. He'll refer to himself as a servant or a slave of Christ. That's not entirely true, but it's close. Please harmonize those two things for me. How is it that we are not children of the slave? How is it that we have been set free and we need to stand firm in that freedom and not be enslaved? How is it that he criticizes those who want to bring Christians into a form of slavery that removes freedom? Into slavery that removes freedom. How is it that he refers to them as false brothers? You see, that doesn't harmonize. That taken universally does not harmonize. You have become slaves of righteousness. I am speaking in human terms because of your natural limitations. I am speaking in human terms. Natural limitations. Mr. Calvinist jumps in right here. And he says what he's talking about here is depravity. Because you are depraved and you have a fallen nature that is no longer in the image of God. You cannot understand this, and so on and so forth. That's what he does right here. And too often, even in sound churches of Christ, we try to find a way to harmonize that Calvinistic theology and state of depravity, because when we read human terms and natural limitations, guess what we think? Some form of depravity. No. Human terms. I don't know. Natural limitations. Have we come across in the last 35, 40 minutes, have we come across any human terms and natural limitations anywhere in the writings of Paul? The elementary principle of the world. The elementary principle of the world. Galatians 4. Forgot to type in 2. The elemental spirit of the world. The elemental spirit of the world. What are all those based on? Oh, I don't know. Philosophy, human deceit, human tradition. Philosophy. Where's philosophy originate? Empty deceit. Human tradition. I'm speaking in human terms. What have we just talked about for the last 45 minutes? What does the human tradition that is based upon the elemental principle of the world, what does that lead to? It leads to captivity. What's another word for captivity? Who are people that are in captivity? What do you call them? Well, you could call them prisoners, or you could call them slaves. I am speaking in human terms because of your natural limitations. You want to understand the book of Romans? You want to understand the book of Romans, you have got to get this right here. What on earth is he talking about? He's talking about the elemental spirit of the world. Because the elemental spirit of the world is based upon human tradition. That's where it expresses itself. The element is the basis. It expresses itself in human tradition, human terms, and natural limitations. Now, who is he writing to here? Well, he's writing to a group of people that are concerned that his statement that grace abounded all the more, that he is somehow telling people that it's okay to continue in sin. Who would be concerned that people were being told it's okay to continue in sin when they are, trying to follow God? Not any Gentile. Later in this same context, he says, I am writing to brothers. First of all, he calls them brothers. He says, I am speaking to those who know the law. Now, what law specifically is he talking about? Oh, the one that says just in a few verses, the one that says in verse number 7, the law that said, you shall not covet. Oh, the Old Testament law. Who the brothers that know law? What law is it that they know? They know the law that says, thou shalt not covet. Old Testament law. Then why on earth, if these are people who received the law of Moses that became slaves of sin, first of all, how they do that, another topic, another day, why does he simply say when he says that you're a slave of righteousness, I have to speak to you in human terms? Well, human terms, once again, human terms are based upon, come out of human tradition. That's how you express human tradition through human terms. That's how we talk to each other. That is based, it is according to the elemental spirits, elemental principles of the world. That's the foundational error. It is the elemental principle, the elemental spirit of the world is the foundational error. When the elemental spirit, the if you will, the natural limitation, because it's the only way we come up with, when that expresses itself, it expresses itself in the creation of human tradition. What kind of traditions? They're regulations. Human traditions. In America, the fourth Thursday is Thanksgiving. Christmas is December 25th. Go on down the line. Okay. You always have Thanksgiving dinner at the same person's house in your family, right? And on Thanksgiving, you always have the same meals, right? Human tradition. Guess what you create? Regulations. And you'd better follow it. Man, if you don't show up at the right house on Thanksgiving dinner, in your family, boy, you just got talked about. At least you created conversation over Thanksgiving dinner, didn't you? Because now everybody can talk about you. That's what happens. Taken to its extreme, what does that make you? The elemental principle of the world creates a human tradition through its regulations, and taken to its extreme, guess what that makes you? That makes you a slave. And when it's related to God, it makes you a slave of righteousness. Which takes us back to, we went to Mark 7. You could go to Matthew 15. Oh, come on. Oh, now I really messed it up. Now I'm grumpy with myself. Hold on. Oh man, I've really messed this up. I created the wrong tab. There you go. Oh, there it is. I fixed it. Ha ha. I didn't know how I fixed it, but I fixed it. Sorry about that. Back to Mark 7. Sorry about that interruption there. Guess what? The Pharisees came in to see when saw Jesus in his. The Pharisees came to see Jesus. Let me say it that way. And they complained that the disciples ate food when their hands were not washed. How does Jesus say that? Or how does Mark describe that for us? It's because they were not holding to the traditions of the elders. Other traditions they had as well. People had to walk according to the traditions of the elders. Not according to the law of Moses. They had to walk according to the traditions of the elders. Okay. The traditions of the elders to do what? To obey the law, because that's what the Pharisees wanted to make sure everybody was doing, was obeying the law. At their best, that's what they wanted. At the worst, they wanted them to obey them. But they created all the traditions of the fathers to help you obey the law. Oh, submit to regulations. That's based upon philosophy, because that's what they thought was right, what turned up to be an empty deceit, and human tradition. And guess what? If you follow that way of life, guess what you thought you were? Well, they teach for doctrine the traditions, which now are now referred to as the commandments of men. And because of that, you leave the commandment of God and you hold to the tradition of men. That's Jesus' response to it. You elevate the tradition of men even above the actual commandment of God. And when you don't hold the tradition of men, they will chase you down and say, wait a minute, your disciples aren't keeping the traditions of the fathers. They aren't holy. They aren't just. They aren't good. And so in order to make themselves right, guess what you have to become? Captive to whatever the human tradition is. I need you to understand that back over here in Romans. I said a few minutes ago, I just about guarantee it. You have heard your preacher, wherever you might be, take this text and try to convince you that you need to be a slave to righteousness. Because that's what you are now. You were a slave to sin, but now you're a slave to righteousness. And we have tried to take that terminology and apply it because of, again, the opening verses of Paul's epistles, and we don't understand the distinction being made there. This is not what he's talking about, or that is not what he's talking about. I am speaking in human terms. You know why? Because, again, his audience knew the law. What law did they know? His audience knew the law of Moses. But how did they know the law of Moses? They knew the law of Moses because they were taught it by the scribes and the Pharisees. Where did the scribes and the Pharisees, where did they? Jesus says they sit on Moses' seat. In other words, they speak as if they have the authority of Moses, because they were the teachers, they were the scribes, the reproducers, they inscribed the law, and then the Pharisees were the educated in the law, if you will. And so Jesus says about them, well, they sit on Moses' seat. And from in an era where you don't have just hundreds and thousands of copies of the law floating around, they're at the temple. Guess who actually does that? Well, the scribes and the Pharisees. So Jesus is saying, yeah, when they tell you Moses' law, they're right, because that's what it says. And so you need to do what they tell you to do, because they're sitting on the seat of Moses. However, but not actually do what they do, because they preach it, but they don't practice it. But they were being taught a Pharisaical way of doing the law, which was based on human traditions, and it was based specifically. Let's go to Matthew's account of it, Matthew 15. Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? How are they being taught the law? They were being taught the law, yes. But in addition to the law, they were being taught the traditions of the fathers. And if you violate the tradition of the fathers, of the elders, our regulations, human traditions based upon our philosophy, will hold you in contempt of God's law. And so, for doctrines of men, we will hold you accountable. Mark's account goes on to say, because of that, what you have done is you have left the commandment of God, and you do that to hold to the tradition of men. The regulations of the Pharisees were exalted above. What does that create? Back in Matthew chapter 23, following them, Jesus says, if you actually follow what they do or what they say, they will tie up heavy burdens that are hard to bear and lay them on people's shoulders when they're not willing to carry them. But notice what they just created there. Let me ask you, just in general, who would you put a heavy burden on that is hard to bear and just lay it upon their shoulders and watch them carry it when you're not willing to carry it, but you have found somebody else that will carry it, that are hard burdens to bear? Do you have a name? Do you have a term that you might call that person that you do that to? about a slave? These people were taught the law of Moses as a system of slavery. That's what they were taught. So when Paul addresses those people who know the law, they didn't know it properly. They knew it because the Pharisees and the scribes sat on the seat of Moses. The way they knew the law said to them that you are sold under sin. I'm 100% convinced that nothing good dwells within me. The law is spiritual, but I can't do it. That's what they were taught. So Paul's response to them is, if I'm talking the way that you understand, I'm going to talk to you in human terms because they're based upon natural limitations, which is the elemental spirit of the world. That's how I'm going to talk to you. And since that's the way you're thinking, there's only one relationship that I can understand for you, master-slave. You once were a slave of sin, but now you are a slave of righteousness. Except that one chapter later, he's going to say there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ. But I thought I was a slave. There you go. I hope that is so much more than you wanted, Elaine, but that actually helps. That stops me from covering more in Galatians than I was intending to. But we'll come back to it on Tuesday. But there you go. I hope that helps. I hope that was helpful for the broader discussion that we have been having. So I appreciate that. Hope that at least got in the ballpark of what you wanted. All right. Now, about half an hour ago or more, somebody else put up a comment. Let's see what we got here. Can a woman teaching, or it says, okay, this is a different topic. Fine, let's do that. Can a woman teaching or leading a Sunday school class, but not in worship, and why, can a woman teach or lead a Sunday school class, I would guess, but not do that in worship? And why, according to Timothy? I'm not sure I'm reading that right, but let me, hold on. What do you have here? I'll come back to you, Ronald. I'll get you before we wrap up today, because I got a comment that's actually on the theme. See what David's got a question here. How come so many Christians are slaves to sin and not slaves to righteousness? Is that because it's not who they are? The answer to that's yes and no. I hope I covered that. I don't know how long that was, from 12:21, so that was 16 minutes ago. I hope I just addressed some of that for you, David. It comes down to mindset. It comes down to just to that. Let me go back to my Marine example, okay? Because that recruit that shows up at boot camp, as he's in the process of becoming a Marine, has to be trained in every single thing. Or a child in the house has to be trained in every single thing, okay? But there is a benefit to that. The benefit to that is, if the one who is doing that, if the drill sergeant is a good one, if the mom and dad who are doing that, if they are good ones, what is the actual goal? You're not trying to create a slave. Okay, that Marine drill sergeant is not trying to create a slave in the Marines. That's not what he wants. It's not what the Marines want. What the Marines want is a soldier. What they're trying to do is to train a soldier to think in exactly the right way. They do that by, you get up at this time, your bed's made, it's made in this way, everything's done perfectly, your boots are shined, everything's good, everything's done perfect. We never take shortcuts. We do this exactly the right way. Okay? I mentioned Eric earlier. Used to drive me insane. That guy who had, when we met, was at the Memphis School of Preaching in '92. He had just gotten back from Desert Storm. I think Desert Storm was right first. Desert Shield was, whichever one was first. The first time over there, he was in it. Okay. And we went to school together. School started at 9 o'clock, whatever started. And I'm not a morning person. I hate mornings. I'd get up at the last possible moment to get there. Okay. This was a Marine who is now my best friend. He used to call me at dark 30 so many times, because guess what he did for all of the time he's in the Marines? He got up at dark 30. Dude still gets up at dark 30. It worked. They created a replica of what they wanted. Okay, that's why you do the same thing for your child. You're not trying to create a slave. You're trying to, by regulation, instill principles that work. Okay? Go back and read your Old Testament through your New Testament. That's what God did. He created principles that work. Because what God wants is you to be like him. He wants your mind to think like his mind. That's why you should be transformed, not conformed to this world. All right? Which, by the way, could you please go back in Romans 7 or through the book of Romans? I appeal to you there, brothers, by the mercy of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Do not be conformed to this world. Could you please tell me who in the book of Romans is trying to be conformed to this world in a hedonistic, sinful way? I would just like to have that discussion with you. Another topic for another day. Inner man first. So why do so many Christians are slaves to sin and not slaves to righteousness? Because you're right. It's not who they are. They didn't transform the inner person. They didn't transform the inner person. Okay? Now, I'm not trying to say there is no regulation and that law has no purpose and so on. It does. It does. It absolutely has benefit and purpose, just like the Marine. It works over time. However, that's not the way we do it with each other. We try to get the cart before the horse. We try to create we think that by creating the regulation, we are going to create the inner man. We're going to change the inner man. That's not the way it works. It's not even the way it works from the Marines. Okay? It's not the way it works from the Marines. I talked earlier about that one Marine that didn't get up at the right time and he wasn't in uniform. He wasn't ready for the drill for that day. And he might have to end up doing push-ups. Yeah, that happens sometimes. But do you know what happens a lot of times? When that one recruit in boot camp does something wrong, do you know who gets punished for it? Not him. Sometimes he does it wrong and he might get away with it. Guess who punishes him? Or guess who is punished? Every other person in the unit might get punished. What are they doing? They're trying to create a culture, trying to create an atmosphere. We are trying to make sure everybody understands in this unit, everybody acts this way. And then you become a part of it. Effectively, what they're doing is by putting that collectively, they're changing the inner man. Okay, that's the way it works. But that's the way it works spiritually too. You have to change the inner man. And sometimes we don't do that. You really want to get into the weeds here. Think about that in your local church. Because sometimes we start creating things in the local church. You ever been in church? We have this argument about what you have to dress when you serve on the table of the Lord's Supper or something like that. Okay, we start creating that. We start creating the regulations without trying to change the inner man. Okay, it's just the way you have to go about it. Create the culture. And the way you create the culture is not by regulation. You create the culture by changing the heart. You do that in the home, and you do that at a church, and you create the culture. Okay, different topic. That's a much broader topic than I've got time for. So anyway, let me go back to Ronald's question here, because that'll kind of wrap us up for the day. Can women teaching and leading in the Sunday school, I assume, do that properly but then not in worship, and why according to 1 Timothy? Now, the passage he's referencing here is 1 Timothy chapter 2. Okay. Because that is the restriction that's here in 1 Timothy 2 to the participation of women in the role of teaching. Okay. Let a woman learn quietly, with all submissiveness. I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over man, but rather she is to remain quiet. Okay? That's the verse that people, two verses rather, that people have in mind when they have that discussion. Ronald, I hope I'm interpreting your question properly, because I have heard people from this passage try to make the argument that this isn't just at church. I have heard people even make the argument that it applies into the home. I've even heard that it applies. People try to make the case that it applies even in collective non-church things, even to the point of perhaps dealing with occupational career type things. Not very often have I heard that. There was I don't know the guy's name. If I ever knew it, I have long forgotten it. It was I had a friend of mine who used to preach up north of Atlanta. I'm going to say Commerce, Georgia. That may not be exactly right, but it was in that area. If you know the Atlanta area, that's kind of northeast. Not. If you're going up towards South Carolina, from Atlanta going to South Carolina, you drive through that area. Commerce is up that way, but I don't know that it was Commerce. It was somewhere up there. There was a nut job. It was causing problems, not just in the church where my friend, I think, was preaching. I think that's where it originated. Like I said, this was 25 years ago. I don't remember it all. But he began to teach that, not just in that church. He began to try and go around to the other churches in that area and cause problems in all those churches. It ended up dividing some churches. And I can't remember specifically how far he went in the application of that, but he took this passage and tried to apply it in every single setting that it could be applied to. He tried to make it in schools and in occupational things. He was taking that as a unilateral state, that there's never a time where a woman she's to be submissive to all men at all times and cannot teach and so on. That was the use that he put of it. Okay. That's an extreme case. That doesn't happen very often. I don't know of anybody who teaches it. Okay. But we need to, we need to address it. I will say this to you. I do believe 1 Timothy chapter 2 is dealing with the quote unquote church. Because not only is chapter 2, but so is chapter 3. Because you go immediately into the overseers, and then you go into the deacons. That's offices, if you will. I don't like the word offices there, but that's roles. How about that? Roles in the church. Okay. But then notice the end of the chapter. Paul says, I'm trying to get to you soon, but I'm writing these things so that if I delay, you might know how one ought to behave in the household of God, which is the church of the living God. So Timothy, I'm writing to you so that you can set things in order, so you'll know what to do. Okay. He even goes on to tell him in chapter 5, what verse do I want in chapter 5? It's got to be later in the chapter. Let the elders that rule do not admit a charge. Verse 19: do not admit a charge against an elder except on the witnesses of or the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. Where's the there it is. Do not be hasty in the laying on of hands, nor take part in the sins of others. Keep each other pure. So in other words, Timothy's going to be setting things up. Which, by the way, to go to the book of Titus, Paul writes to Titus. And he says, I left you in Crete so that you might put what remained in order. Like what? Oh, I don't know. Appoint elders in every town. And then lo and behold, guess what's here is the qualifications of an elder. Okay. So what he's doing is telling Titus to put things in order. And what he's doing for Timothy is, I'm on my way to come see you, but if I can't get there, you need to know how to behave in the house of God. Well, how do you do that? Well, you have deacons that are proper. You have overseers, ESV, elders, other translations. You have those that are proper. And, oh, by the way, ignore that chapter division because those are man-made. Okay? This all goes together. Guess what else you need to make sure is going on? That when prayers are said, now there's a lot of, we'll not do the first 7 verses because he's talking about the nature of the prayer, but guess who's going to be saying those prayers? Men should pray. Okay, that is the Greek word man. That is the Greek word on air. It's not a generic. It is the Greek word for male, men. Okay, so that is a specific qualification of men. And then down here, likewise, women need to behave themselves properly, because men, when you're praying, you need to do it without quarreling or with anger, and you need to do it in a holy manner, which sounds a whole lot like I'm teaching you how to behave yourself in the house of God, in the church of God. Okay? And so that precedes this discussion of women. Now, two things are said about women. One, adorn yourself with modesty and in self-control. And two, the relationship of men and women is right here in the verses that follow. Okay? Now, I would notice this. First of all, verse 8. I desire that in every place the men should pray. Are women ever told to pray? Of course they are. And I'm not going to try and chase those verses down, but yeah, any number of verses you can find throughout your Bible about women praying. Yeah, kind of allowed. Kind of allowed. So this is not a universal statement, can't be. Okay? Likewise, women should adorn themselves in respectable apparel with modesty and self-control, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly attire. Is there ever a time where a woman can violate this? I mean, it's none of your business whatsoever. But over the last 36 years, I've kind of appreciated a few times when Julie has violated that. Y'all ladies, your husband kind of likes that. He does. And that's biblical. That's 1 Corinthians chapter 7. There are absolutely times where the violation of that is 100% allowable and legal. And on the behalf of husbands here, let me encourage you, ladies, at the appropriate time, violate that. Please do. Okay? So no, that's not universal. Okay, that's the nature of it. Now, however, where is it that this should be done? Well, how about how you behave yourself in the house of God? That's the context. Well, where is it that she should really be careful about how she adorns herself? Well, within this context, how about in the household of God? Okay? Where is the time where she is to learn quietly with all submissiveness and so on? Oh, I don't know. How about in the household of God? This entire context, not just the individual phrases, but this entire context is how you behave yourself in the household of God, which is consistent with the complementary passage over in Titus chapter 1, which is set the things that are lacking in order. Get the church behaving right. Okay, we are dealing with some form of the collective work of the church here. That's what we're doing. Men, do it in a holy manner. Do it without anger. Do it without quarreling. Women, come in with good works. Do what's proper. Don't be showy. Okay, this is, by the way, it is modest, but modest not in the opposite of modest here would not necessarily be sensual. Okay, it would include sensual, which I just kind of talked about. It would include it, but immodest, if you look at this, is also going to be costly attire. So not just the fact that it might be sensual, it might just be showy. Okay? And yeah, I have seen some women dress like they're coming into church, and have mercy. It's a little showy. Of course, I have seen some women that probably need to revisit that word modest coming into worship too. That's another topic for another day as well. But behave yourself properly. Now, to get to the question. If this is the gathering of the church in some capacity, is a woman allowed to teach in that environment? Well, first of all, is she allowed to speak at all? Here it says quietly. I don't have time with what we have left. Yeah, I'm running out of time here. I don't have time to go to 1 Corinthians 14, because there is a difference in the language that is in 1 Corinthians 14 versus here, where the one is quietly and the other is just silence. Okay, here's quietly. I think 1 Corinthians 14, you can make the case of silence. Slightly different topic. Okay, but is she allowed at all to speak? Is she allowed at all to teach in the assembly? Not Sunday morning worship, because that's kind of the question. Bible class versus worship. The worship assembly versus, 9 o'clock Bible study, 10 o'clock worship. Are those different? I guess that's the question. Is she allowed to teach in the assembly of God's people? Let me answer it by this way. Okay. Let's just go back to Colossians since we've been there so much. Let's do Colossians. Okay. Colossians 3:15. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which you are indeed were called in one body, and be thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. Are women supposed to do that? Are women supposed to do that? Yeah. They're allowed to do that. They're supposed to do that. The ladies in our audience today, you need to have the word of Christ dwelling in you richly. Okay. Now, I do think that if you're going to put that in a first century context, you're going to be dealing with some of the gifts of the Holy Spirit. Different topic another day. But the application of that in a modern sense would still be applicable. That would include women. Teaching and admonishing one another. Does that include women? In all wisdom. See, again, we're going to be tied to the gifts of the Holy Spirit here. How? How is it that you are teaching and admonishing one another? By singing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. Ephesians 5 says almost exactly the same in the language. Speaking, I think, is the word language in the ESV in Ephesians 5. Teaching and admonishing one another. Psalms, hymns, spiritual songs. Barbara properly makes the comment that in private settings, Aquila and Priscilla were active in the teaching of Apollos. That's true. Okay. But our question has to deal with, I lost, where did it go? That's the wrong one. Where did it go? There it is. Not privately. In the assembly, can a woman teach? The last time I was in the assembly, and every single time in my life that I can remember that I've been in the assembly, in the household of God, guess how many times I was taught by women? And frankly, since the way we sing has the lead as the soprano voice all the time, nearly all the time, guess what voices you hear? And if you're in a small country church, there's always one woman. There's always one sister. If you're in a little country church somewhere, there is always one sister who's got that soprano voice that just drowns out everybody else. Okay? But how many times have I been taught by a woman in the assembly? And that is the word here. That is a properly translated word. That is a form of let me just verify that I'm right there. I think I got to be right here. It can't be any other word. Yeah, didasko. That is the word there. That is the Greek word for teach. Okay. Okay. I do not permit a woman to teach. Okay. Didasko, same exact word. Paul says, I do not permit a woman to teach, but then he commands that in song, she is to teach. Unless somehow you are excluding women from this verse, you got to harmonize that. You have to harmonize that. You absolutely do. Because this has to be some, maybe not the Sunday morning, I don't know. It has to be the assembly. It's one another. Y'all are together. We use this verse as a basis. We inside Churches of Christ properly use this as one of the verses for congregational singing. Not a performance, not a choir, congregation, everybody, one another. We sing to each other. That's the nature of it. And in that assembly, she has to teach and admonish. Women, you can't sit there and be quiet. That's why this is important. Between being silent and to learn quietly. You know, I talked about that small country church that's got that one woman. She's almost always a soprano. Okay. I have been in small country churches where I think that singular woman, let me just say she was intentional. Okay. I have been in settings where a singular woman soprano, and this is the small 30-member country church. She's got the best and biggest voice in that room, and she is actually controlling the singing. Been there. Now, what I've also witnessed is that man who's a farmer or whatever he does, he doesn't sing. He can't sing. He's leading singing because he knows men are supposed to be leading the services, and he is actually thankful because that lady's voice is actually helping the congregation sing. Okay, so I'm going to say it's intentional. Could it be the case that she is not doing it submissively? See, that loud soprano that's helping the song leader in that little bitty tiny church, who's not really a capable song leader, he's just doing it because he knows the man ought to be up doing it. Is she still submissive in the broader sense? I think she is. I think she is. Is she noticeable? Can she be seen? Can she be heard? And in that sense, is she controlling the singing? Yes. But this comes down to the intent of the heart. She is not trying by loudness and so on to override the authority of the assembly. She's trying in harmony with the assembly to help the assembly worship fully. I don't have a problem with that at all. I will say, though, I think I have been in some settings where she absolutely was exercising authority here, and so on. So, but let's get back to the point specifically here. Outside of singing, is she to be the teacher of the room? I don't know how you can read that, whether it be to get to Ronald's question, whether it be the class or the formal assembly of the Sunday morning or Sunday night, Wednesday night. I don't know how you can take that statement and turn it to anything other than, and turn it to her actively teaching. Because I'm sure the fact that he says teaching or leading, I'm assuming Ronald has that in mind. I don't know how you make any distinction between the class and the assembly. Not from a principled point. Now, from a practical point, perhaps you can, because I have been in classes where I have taught classes where I have been teaching something, and lo and behold, a sister in that assembly makes a comment in the class, which I welcomed because that was the nature of the class. It's one we're allowed to talk to each other. And she makes a comment in the class that I had not thought of or hadn't popped in, whatever. And I just learned something she taught in the Bible class. Absolutely, that has happened. And I would encourage that to happen in most every setting. Is that different than the assembly? If a sister jumped into the assembly and started talking while I was up preaching, just the nature, not necessarily the biblical constraint here, although again, 1 Corinthians 14, we would have some biblical constraints if we were going down that path that we would need to apply here to get the full story. But the structure of that is not the structure of collectively in a classroom, which is in our culture understood to be a communicative type thing. It's not a monologue, it's a conversation. Most of the time, not always, but most of the time. The assembly, on the other hand, is not. Okay? So I would make that distinction based upon the utilitarian practical nature of it, the cultural nature of it, and how that would then therefore be perceived. But it is only that difference in perception which might have some impact upon the doctrine. Okay, the doctrine does not submit to all of the utilitarian concerns. We cannot ever violate the doctrine. Okay, so in a broad answer to your question, women should not be teaching any collective assembly of the body of Christ. Okay? Because that is what 1 Timothy 2 is talking about. Now, to get back to Barbara's comment, absolutely. Aquila and Priscilla and other examples. Philip had 4 daughters that were prophetesses. What's that? Acts, 4 daughters of Philip. That's left-hand page, right-hand column. It's got to be Acts 19 or 20, doesn't it? That's when Paul comes back, isn't it? That can't be 19 then. It's got to be 20 or 21 when Paul comes back into toward Jerusalem. That's got to be Acts 20 or 21. Somebody find that verse for me. Philip, who had 4 virgin daughters who prophesied. They prophesied at some point. Okay. Not here. They couldn't do that. But this verse is about the household of God. Now, again, broader discussion than we have time for today. I hope that helps some, though, because that's where I would go with it. This text applies, this whole text applies to how you behave yourself in the household of God. So if it is an assembly, if it is a gathering, a function of the household of God, which is the church of the living God, if that's what it is, if it is that function, while she does not have to remain absolutely silent, she has to sing and so on, she is to do that quietly, submissively, and not teaching in any way or exercise or do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over. Okay. She is to maintain that demeanor about herself at all times. Okay. In any function of the household of God, which would of course include the teaching or leading on a Bible class and worship. From a doctrinal standpoint, I can't see anywhere they have any difference. Anyway, hope that got to your question there, Ronald. Thank you for the comment, though. That took us off Galatians, but hey, that's why we do this the way we do it. We can go wherever we need to go. So good comments. I appreciate all the people coming in and making lots of those participating today. I'm going to have to wrap it up there, but Lord willing, we will see you back here on for this class on Tuesday. And it has been my pleasure, as is always the case, been my pleasure to be with you today. Look forward again to being with you on Tuesday. If you're not part of the Rockledge Church of Christ pages, do that, because on our YouTube page at least, we do stream all of our other classes and so on that are taught here from the Rockledge building. Those do not typically appear over on Digital Bible Study. So if you want to see those, if you want to hear me talk more, I don't know why you would, but if you want to hear me talk more, join us over on the Rockledge channel pages. You'll get those over there. So until next time we were able to be together, as always, it is my prayer that you will go out and make your day a great